my grandfather is sitting at the top of the stairs. Now, this dude, he had been through World War II, and he came back a decorated soldier. He had been through hell. This guy had seen really bad things while in the war, and he wasn't afraid of anything. And this dude pulls me down onto his lap and wouldn't let me go. And I'm screaming, "We have to go in!" And he's not moving. He looks completely serene while he's watching this cloud approach us. Now, my grandmother appears at the door, and she's this tiny lady, and she's just screaming at him to let us in. And I could barely hear her because the wind, like, suddenly picked up, and it was just that train sound that you hear about accompanying tornadoes. That was starting to happen, so I could barely hear her, and she was screaming at the top of her lungs. And the wind started to push the door shut, and that door was glass. So I was afraid it was going to shatter and hurt her, and that the wind would just pick her up and carry her away because she was tiny.
Good evening, Chicago, and welcome to another episode of Chicago Corner. I'm your host, Jerry Vasilatos, and I'm navigating the board here tonight. And I'm going to be welcoming our guest, the voice, the author and podcaster behind the voice of that excerpt you just heard from Mars Messina Presents on Spotify, and the author of the two books, Babel Speak and Red Moon Over Gaeta. Please welcome Mars Messina. Mars, thank you for coming to the show tonight.
Jerry, it's always a pleasure. Always.
So that it was an excerpt from the podcast you did over on Spotify. I think it was about storm chasing.
It was.
Or about tornadoes and cyclones in the Midwest. And that's just one of the many different local topics and subjects that you share and tell stories about in your podcast. And I'd like to begin by asking you to tell our viewers tonight a little bit about your background as an author and creative. And I know you're also in health. You're also a health worker. Please introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about your background to our listening and viewing audience.
Okay, since we started with the podcast, I'll address that first, even though it's my newest venture. So there's two reasons why I'm doing the podcast. One of them is I want to relax people because we live in a world where there's at least like a low energy anxiety going on, or people are really losing their minds. And I just want to relax people, And that's one reason I do the podcast. The other reason is when it comes down to really, Jerry, I mean, you and I have known each other for years, so we can not see each other for years and then pick up where we left off, it's a wonderful thing. But I'm not like that with most people. I'm a little shy. I'm a little reserved. I'm a little introverted. And I don't like small talk. And if there's a party and there's 10 people sitting around talking, I usually go mute and I listen. And what this podcast is, it's the conversations I would have. Yeah, because it's not small talk. It's not gossip. It's just these weird things or random things that I happen to be interested in. And so I talk for 30 minutes, which is not something I usually do. I'm usually a little quieter until you get to know me. So that's the reason I'm doing the podcast. And it's a whole new venture, I think, for the both of us. We're used to, we first had analog video and audio that we were playing with, and then we were introduced to digital. Now this is a whole new medium, and it's exciting, and I really like it. So I'm doing this podcast, Mars Messina Presents, and then we move a little bit backward. Actually, it's still present, but for the last, I'd say 10 years, 11 years, I've been a licensed massage therapist, and I'm also a yoga teacher. I've been teaching yoga since the early 2000s. And before that, film school, and I did PA work, and I did line managing or unit managing, and I did that for a while until I went into a more holistic type of lifestyle.
You could say these are kind of like the audio and literary manifestations of what you do as a massage therapist, because you mentioned earlier the podcast kind of evolved out of wanting to be able to give people a relaxing experience. And was that effort or initiative thought about pre-COVID, or was it something that grew out of everybody being in for the last year in quarantine during lockdown and figuring this is a perhaps great alternative I can offer to people who are stuck at home looking for new entertainment, new stories that they can discover?
That's a good question, but it actually preceded all of that. So in my younger life, I was very aggressive. I really went after the world because I felt like I had to. I felt like I had to fight in order to find a place in this world. Otherwise, I'd be crushed because I won't go into all of that, but I felt like I had to be very aggressive and very loud. And that's just not really my style. I'm the moon, like you're the sun, Jerry, and I'm the moon.
On.
You are.
It's
no,
good,
you
though,
are.
we counter. I know Mars from
Compliment.
college and actually earlier from high school.
Yeah.
We knew each other in high school and have kept in touch throughout the years. And creatives, I like that metaphor about the sun and the moon.
Well, thank you. And I like metaphors because that tells people in a very short piece what I'm trying to talk about. Anyway, I was finding in my own life that I needed to go soft to find my strength. And I needed to grow up a little bit before I figured that out. And that more came along with my yoga work and my massage work. And I'll tell you, Jerry, the last couple of years, I would have clients come in and when they're getting their massage, and they'd be like, tell me a story. And I had been hearing for years that my voice soothes people. And then I heard it, because I've heard my voice before. And I have that thing that a lot of people have. You hear your own voice and you're like, ew.
Oh, we all do that.
But then I really just stopped and I'm sorry.
So we're all like that because it filters through our own ears differently than how others hear us. Right.
Comes out a little higher, your voice. Yeah. Anyway.
That's why I always try to focus when I'm broadcasting to bring mine down.
You've got a nice voice.
Paging Mr. Herman. Mr. Herman.
You don't need to get paging Mr. Herman.
You have a telephone call at the front desk. Anyway, no, I'm sorry to interrupt you with clowning around your mouth. But going back to your voice.
Is there a mic?
You have a very soothing voice. Definitely.
Yeah. So people would ask me to tell them stories while I'm massaging them. I get it. You want me to touch you and relieve your muscles, and you want to hear that voice so that you can zone out for an hour. I get that. And I'm like, I got to do a podcast. And I had one young woman who was in her 20s, and she loved just talking about being a millennial. And she's like, the millennials will love your voice. You've got to do a podcast. So this has been in my mind really for a couple of years. But it wasn't until, the pandemic where I had the time to really, start to develop stories and start to develop, rediscover some of my audio editing skills. And I found the time to do it. And I'm like, now is the time to do it. So here I am doing it.
Perfect.
So, yeah.
And how many episodes are you up to now on the podcast on Spotify?
Did I just publish number 9?
Number 9, I think. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I have to admit, I haven't been able to listen to all of them, but when I do, I think I've gotten through 3 or 4 that I play when I'm doing stuff around the house, and they're fascinating. And I know that one of the other things I wondered, I have your second book, Babel Speak, which I also started reading since it is a compilation of short stories. And this book was published during the pandemic. So I'm assuming, and I believe that a lot of the stories were inspired by what was not necessarily happening during the pandemic, but kind of the feeling of dread and fear and trying to come to some kind of comfort level, because the title is Babel Speak, a trio of bedtime stories for a dying empire, which I think can relate to a lot of things we're seeing going on around us. But is the podcast an adaptation of some of the compiled short stories from the books, or they are separate entities?
Separate entities.
Okay.
But probably coming from the same space in my heart and in my mind. So yes, you're right. Babel Speak absolutely was very directly, I was very directly affected by the pandemic, as we all were. I didn't get sick, but I was affected. And I wrote down, in fiction, of course, but how I was feeling and what I was hoping would be the outcome. I was hoping that people would be more drawn together. I was hoping this would be the car crash that we all survive together.
Yeah.
And I don't know if it has to take something else. I don't know, Jer. But anyway, that's what the book was, that was the spirit of the book.
That's a great
There's hope.
Yeah.
There's hope. Yeah.
And what about the first book, Red Moon over Gaeta?
Oh boy, that book. Okay, so that's a little bit different. Now that book came out in, 2017, and I had taken about 2 years to write it. So there were a couple things in there, and I'm going to talk about my mother. Now, there's a lot I can say about her, but what I am going to say about her is she was a great cook, like incredible. And I would go and visit her on the weekends, and she'd always have the Food Network on. And I was like, Mom, you can do that. Like, she'd be watching Giada De Laurentiis or Rachel Ray or whoever. I think, there were a couple others that she really liked, but those two. And I'm like, you could do what they do because they're cooking Italian. You do it just as well or better. And I'm like, and she had this personality. She was very gregarious, very extroverted. And she somehow got under people's skin. Like she had tons of friends and her home was always Grand Central Station. And she was so charming. And I'm like, Mom, I know camera crews. And I was even thinking of you. I'm like, I know camera crews. I'm like, let's get one in here and just go cinema verite. You don't have to act, and you can dress like crap if you want to, or you can dress up in the, in the nines if you want to. Let's do this. We can do this, and you will be a millionaire. And she would have, but she didn't believe in herself. Nah, I don't want to do any of that. And so for years I was on her because I knew this was the real deal. Like people would have loved her show. Well, she died. And I was heartbroken, of course. So this right after she died, I was going through her things and I found she was starting to write an autobiography. And the point of view she was taking was very much like Laura Ingalls Wilder. She was talking about herself, but she called herself, she had a different name for herself. And it was in that Laura Ingalls Wilder type of whimsical, like a teenager could read it, or maybe a little kid could read it. Anyone could relate to it. And I didn't have that voice. I was going to finish the book for her, but I didn't have that exact voice. And at the time I was completely heartbroken. So I'm like, well, I've got to write, because if she didn't have children, she would have been a writer. And I'm like, I've got to pick this up for her. And I never had the patience to do a novel, but at that point I did. And so part of this is I've taken her essence and put it into my book. And then and the protagonist is a very world-renowned, famous TV chef. So that was one aspect of the book. The other aspect is my undying love for Italy. And a lot of the story takes place in Italy.
Your first podcast focuses on your trip to Italy.
Yeah.
Spotify.
Yeah. Italy is always on my mind. I'll even dream that I'm in Italy. I'll dream in Italian. I'm not fluent, but I know enough where I'll sometimes even dream in Italian.
When was the last time you were there?
Oh, it's been a while.
Yeah.
8 years. I've been there a few times.
So
but not enough.
We're speaking to Mars under her her pen name. You want to tell us a little bit about? I just love that name, and I know your real name. She's got a secret identity, and I don't know
just like Batman.
That's right. I don't know if you want to share your actual secret identity, or you just want to tell the story behind the origin of your pen name, Mars Messina, which I found really fascinating. Because we talked before the show, I said, "Do you want me to introduce you as I know you, or Mars Messina?" And so we'll talk about it on the show. So I think that's also interesting too for authors who want to market themselves and create a persona. The reasons for the direction that you took.
Yeah. So I actually spoke to a famous author, and I'm not going to drop the name, because the way we came together, yes, I knew that this was a famous author and I'm a fan, but something personal kind of happened. So we got to talking, and they said to me, use your pen name because that's how you're going to sell your books. So, because I'm like, I'll just sign off. I'll just use this email. And it was my real name. And they're like, no, use Mars Messina. That's how you're going to make your money. So anyway, I will tell you that my real name is Mary, and Mars is just one letter off, so I can relate to it. And people call me Mars, not very many people, but when you're writing a Christmas card or a birthday card and somebody writes Jer, like J-E-R.
Yeah.
Well, a lot of people call me Mars, the people who know me. So they would spell it M-A-R-S. So, and then they like giggle and say Mars. They're like, that's a good name for you, Mars. So there were like 2 or 3 people already calling me Mars, and it's close enough to Mary. So I chose Mars. And Messina is a town in Sicily, and it's one of my ancestral ancestral towns. And the reason I have a pen name is because my real name is so ubiquitous, which I don't have a problem with. It's just that, I'll tell people, hey, go read Babel Speak or go read Red Moon over Gaeta, and they will not remember the title, but they'll type in my name and 1 million people with my same name come up. So it's very hard to find my books. So then I'm like, I need a pen name. So I republished the books with my pen name. So if you type in Mars Messina, you're going to find my books. So that's why I have the pen name.
That's actually what I was doing right now. I was getting your name through Google. I want to bring up your Spotify page as we are talking with each other. Let me see if I can share the screen here. It's going to come up here. There we go. There's your Spotify page.
Yep.
Because I was going, we're up to episode 9 there. This is where people can find your collected podcasts. And from the shows that I listened to, although your book, you were talking about Red Moon over Gaeta being inspired by your mother, and Babel Speak being inspired by kind of bringing people together during the pandemic, your podcast seems to be inspired by your own true life stories.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I try to put a little bit of myself in there. Like just my last show, I talked about ancient Pompeii. So what have I got to do with that? I was born in the 20th century, but I have to put a little bit of myself in that so that you can relate to what I'm talking about. Because you could there's tons of books, there's tons of videos on ancient Pompeii, but what's my angle? I have a unique angle, so I'm going to throw it in there. Or something like what was one of the social commentary. A friend of mine asked me to talk about social commentary, and so you got to throw yourself in there a little bit. I didn't want my podcast to be political, but maybe that one got slightly, like I kind of inched toward that. Now, because you and I know each other, my stance pretty much about how I feel in politics, but you have a great show. People can turn to your show if they want to hear politics or a million other shows out there. And I just didn't want to be the political show. I wanted to do something different. So...
Well, I had mentioned when we were on Friday night, I was talking with my other co-host, Kira, and both of our activist activities. And I had mentioned my first foray here in Chicago and just participating in activist activities had been going down to Occupy Wall Street with a friend, and you were that friend who.
Yep, I
who
raised my
down,
hand when you said that.
Yeah, down to LaSalle Street, which was an interesting time. So much has happened since then with different ways of social protest and activism these days.
Yeah.
So you now live in Bridgeport, although you were originally from Wilmette, as am I. And
Winnetka.
Pardon
actually, actually, I moved all over the North Shore. I was actually originally from, when you met me, I was living in Winnetka.
Okay.
Yeah.
But you're settled now in Bridgeport, and I'm on the north side. And I think even though we were, maybe people would call us North Shore brats, we feel much more comfortable in the city, having, retransplanted our roots here, and being as vocal and involved in what we see in our local civic scene.
Yeah, I'll tell you something about living on the North Shore. Now, I wasn't wealthy like most of the people up there are. So I was already the kid on the wrong side of the tracks.
I think we both were.
I think we both were. But and you'll know what I'm about to say. I mean, you get a good look at some of these people, and I'm generalizing here. I don't want to offend anybody, but you go into their homes and you get a good look, and you see a lot of fear. A lot of people they're hiding from each other, and they're hiding from themselves. And I saw these pristine homes with these pristine looking people and really dark crap going on.
Superficialities covering up. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. There's a real dark underbelly to all that beauty. And I didn't want it. I didn't want it. I always wanted to be comfortable financially, but I didn't want what they had. In fact, the last time I went to a very wealthy home, I looked around and I was like, I wouldn't want to be responsible for this, and I wouldn't want it crushing me down, because these people were so stressed out keeping up with it. And I was like, not for me.
You did the podcast on tornadoes, and I recall, and I don't know the details of this, but I think we kind of, I think it kind of passed in conversation once, both of our interests in storm chasing. And I think that, am I correct in remembering that at one point in your illustrious adventures, you had been involved with some storm chasers?
Yes. So this was years ago. I really, really wanted to go on a storm chase, and I knew it would be a dumb venture if I wasn't completely prepared. So I found somebody who had like a really big, I don't know what they're called, Ford F-150, or something bigger than that. So a big truck that had all-wheel drive, and we got a hold of some radar, and I'm like, I don't want it like that Twister movie. I think we all love that Twister.
How true to life was
No.
what we saw in Twister with actual storm chasing?
No, you're not rocking out when you're chasing a storm.
No flying cows.
No. Well, I didn't see any flying cows, but that happens now. But you're not listening to hard rock, and you're not getting psyched up like that, because it's very dangerous. You have to listen, and you have to watch that radar, because we were watching a storm form 2 miles to our north. And generally speaking, if you're being a storm chaser, you want to be 2 miles south of the storm, because tornadoes generally move east, and sometimes they track north. So if you're south of it, you get a great panorama, and it's not coming toward you, generally speaking, but you don't know what's popping up over your head. And if you're not careful, that will happen. And it almost happened to us, because they were arguing about getting the correct, angle on the picture and blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, you guys, what is that above us? And one of the guys said, let's get out of here. Let's get out of Dodge. And we just ran. Nothing popped down on top of us, but we ran, and we started driving even further south, and you looked into the rear view mirror and you saw it come down, and it would have been right over us or on top of us. So you can't goof around. And then there's that scene where I think, he walked right up to the tornado and threw a beer bottle in it. There are some chasers that will do that if it's an F0 or an F1 even, but you don't do that to a tornado. You try to stay out of the way and get a good picture. And then even then, Jerry, even then, you're wondering where that tornado has been and where it's going. And is it killing somebody? So if you're sitting there high-fiving over the great video that you've got, unless it's for science, so unless it's for research, get out of the way, because people are dying. People are losing their homes. Yeah. It's very serious.
Was that your first and last foray into storm chasing, given how close you came there, or did you do it for a little bit more?
Well, as far as if you want to call it formal storm chasing, I did it twice. And one time it was nighttime, and it was very scary because you couldn't see anything, even though something was close by. And we were just like, you know what, this is dangerous. Let's just get out of here. So that was kind of a bust. And then we had that one day where we saw a few. Anytime after that, if there was like a tornado coming into Chicago, I'd just go out there with my camera to see if I could catch anything. And one time I did. I should have sent that to you. One time I caught something. I was on the Roosevelt station line, the orange line.
Oh, wow.
And I saw one flying right over the lake, and it became a water spout. And I got a picture of it. I should have sent that to you. But I couldn't. Well, I have to find it.
I was always fascinated by it just because of the adrenaline rush I thought would come from it. The closest you say it's definitely something you want to get out of the way of. And when I first came back to Chicago in 2007, after 10 years in Los Angeles, I was staying at my parents' up in Wilmette. And deep sleeper that I was in my old childhood bedroom and woke up looking out my window to discover the back fence having a hole through the middle of it. The next door neighbor's tree that was literally outside my window knocked down across the yard, and it's like had it gone on our roof, I would have been right underneath it.
Oof.
I don't know which life that may have been for me.
Yeah, really.
6th or 7th.
I think you're Catwoman and not Batman.
Yeah, or Catwoman. But we found out later it was a microburst, and it had gone right through the net. And I just find it humorous, deep sleeper that I am, that I slept right through it and woke up and said, "My God, I'm really, really close to being in some serious danger with the damage that these things create." And is in your podcast. I think it was podcast 2, talking about the loss of life in regards to the Midwest stories that you shared. Are you going? That would be a good podcast to do on your experiences storm chasing. Give us a little.
Yeah, I guess I haven't had much luck with it that I wanted to devote a whole podcast to it. It's very, actually tornadoes are pretty elusive, and it's very hard to get pictures. Now we're seeing them more because of the way social media is these days. And this is so dangerous. There's so many people out there now chasing that you're more likely to get killed in a car accident than by the storm, because people, they're not watching. They'll be parked somewhere, and then they just bolt out into the street and start driving without looking behind them to see who's coming up, because that's how many people out there. They'll drive into dirt roads that get wet, and then they're stuck, and there's a big storm overhead. And there's a million different ways that people can get killed just by the traffic. And we didn't have that much luck. That's why I didn't really talk about it.
How do you pick and choose from the adventures or stories that you've encountered in your life to adapt into presenting on your podcast? Because as we saw a moment ago, I'll bring the screen up again. There are a lot of different topics. Yeah. And as we were talking about the North Shore a moment ago, and that whole scene, I remember one specific tragedy that I think would make a fascinating adaptation, as far as just the human spirit and how growing up on the North Shore can really maybe take its toll on people. I don't know. I just think that you've got so many great personal stories that
Right.
will manifest into the podcast. And as you mentioned, the North Shore, I just thought of that one. I think you know the one I'm talking about.
I know what you're talking about.
Yeah, and there are lots of others. There are lots of
Yeah.
others from the rich experiences that you've had through your life to be able to weave into these narratives to share with people and get them thinking.
Yeah. Yeah, because I would say that any work, if there's any common thread in my work, I do want to express hope, either overtly or covertly. I want to express hope. And and there are some tragedies that did happen on the North Shore. And one of those is really dark. And I actually did explore it in a film that I did at Columbia.
Mm.
And it was more like Italian neorealism because there was no happy ending to this story. And so if I did explore that again, I would have to find an angle where there was a message of hope, at least.
Yeah. Try to bring some light from the darkness to help others listening to that tale.
Yeah, and sometimes you have to travel in the dark. You know what? I mean, there's people out there, you're in the dark. Well, guess what? Keep going through the dark. You have to work with the dark and work with dark things sometimes. But it's in that process that you will eventually come to the light, either on purpose or it'll find you. And so don't feel bad if you're in the dark. There's lessons to be learned there too.
So when you do your podcast, do you outline what you're going to talk about, or is it all stream of consciousness? Because I know obviously you've got these stories up here, and it does sound very natural when you do share the stories on the podcast, although I'm sure there's got to be some kind of organizing principle. And I guess it'd be interesting to hear your creative process for others who might want to podcast or who've thought about expressing themselves in that way. I mean, it's not just getting the Spotify account or getting an account to share on any other platform. You've got to have that creative spark to organize your thoughts. So maybe I'm curious to know what your process is with that.
Okay, so the way I start out is I have a running sheet of paper where I put just topics up there. I just kind of bullet point topics that I want to talk about. Because like I said, part of the reason I do the podcast is what would I talk about really if I had the chance to talk socially and somebody was really going to sit and have a one-on-one to me and really listen. Because like I said, I don't do well at parties. I fake it till I make it, but I don't like that. I like to have the one-on-one. I'd like to have the heart-to-heart. And I talk about things that maybe people don't normally think about. Maybe I have different interests than most people. So anyway, I just write all those down or type them down. And then I'm like, what am I feeling like this week? And then I'll just check one of them off and I start thinking about it. And what I do an outline because I don't want to sound like I'm reading something. I want to sound spontaneous, and I am, but I also want to sound like that I'm organized as well. So I do an outline, but that's all I do. I do an outline and then I riff off of the outline.
It's your bullet points because it's like the bones, and then you fill out the meat, you flesh it out.
Yeah.
As you access all those memories.
Exactly.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Do you have another book on the horizon? And I'm going to share your Amazon page here. Let me get this up. Add that to the stream. There we go.
There we go. Find me on Amazon.com.
And I've got all your links in the show notes too below, so people can find you on Spotify as well as on Amazon to get your books to read your work. Yeah,
you're so organized, Jerry. You're such a great producer.
Well, thank you.
So yeah, you are. So yes. To that question. Well, I actually have one that's published, but I pulled it down because it needs more editing. So I've got to do that. And then I have 2 novels that are just kind of hanging around that need really like a lot of editing. But then I'm thinking, a lot of people aren't reading anymore. I mean, the kind of society we live in, I mean, there's some people they're going to be avid readers for the rest of their lives, but that's, few and far between anymore. And I'm thinking maybe I should turn these novels into serials, and break them up a little bit. Yeah. And, put out book 1 and then book 2. In fact, one of my friends read one of the novels and he said, this should be a series and not a novel.
Which
and
one?
He had a point.
An upcoming one or one of the 2 here that you've already authored?
No, an upcoming one.
Okay.
Yeah. He said this would be remarkable and he said even gear it toward the teenage audience, because even though it's not written for a teenage audience, per se, the protagonist is a teenager. And so he said, just gear this for the teenagers. And he goes, the adults will enjoy this too, but you can gear this toward the teenagers. And so I'm thinking about that, and I might put it out as a series.
Oh, I think you're onto something there. Much in the way that everybody just grabs fast food because they don't have enough time to sit at home and cook. Our culture today is especially with social media and the internet, it is easier for people to listen to books on audio or listen to podcasts, because this is where we're getting most of our information, so we can multitask. That's one of the exciting things I found in participating here at Hardlands Media and helping out with Chicago Corner as a huge news junkie, but also and I think you too, having come from growing up in Chicago and listening to such great radio personalities that would have guests on. Right off the top of my head, I'm thinking of, Steve Gary.
All of them. Yeah.
Steve and Gary over at the Loop.
Love them.
Wendy Snyder and Tony Fitzpatrick. Then I'm thinking about some other hosts. Well, I mean, the luminaries were really over at WLUP. And although they more often than less, oh, sorry about that, guys.
That's all right.
Let me get rid of that call. Although they more often than less focused on comedy, they would also have a lot of celebrities and other newsmakers into the studio. And I've always thought from way back when it would be so cool to do a talk show, to go on the radio. And I had an opportunity to go on. I think Gary Meyer interviewed me, and it was Gary. It wasn't Steve.
I remember.
And then I went on Wendy Snyder and Tony Fitzpatrick's show when I was promoting my movie Solstice, of which you were one of the producers on.
Yep. Yay.
But there was the bite there, like, wow, it'd be cool to have a space to talk and share. As I said the other night, have a place to exercise my big mouth, but also entertain guests and stimulating conversation. And so that's a factor of what I am excited to bring to Chicago Corner. Although we cover a lot of the news topics and breaking news that happen from across the city, this particular live stream is going in the direction that I'd like to do more of on the show, with inviting local artists, inviting local personalities on to share what they're working on, if it's outside the normal scope of news, like if it's in the arts or music or exciting stuff that's happening across our 50 wards. So I feel like this is the little manifestation on the side of doing a radio show in this new media.
I'm excited.
Yeah,
I'm excited.
You have this on Spotify.
This is beautiful because I've always kind of seen you as a Walter Jacobson type of character anyway. And you've been a filmmaker all these years, and now you're marrying the two. Yeah. And I love it. I think this is probably, even though I know your heart and soul is in Solstice, but I'm so glad you're doing this.
Making movies. Well, so Solstice was, for those that don't know, that was a film that I did back in 1993, which I financed with the proceeds from a personal injury settlement I received for the loss of my leg. And it wasn't planned, but I always tell people, where some people say it costs an arm and a leg to make a movie, mine only cost a leg. But my heart was always in being a director and a producer. And we spent through my settlement in Solstice, of which you so graciously helped produce and
my pleasure
and put the team together. But my heart's always been in narrative and directing and producing, and I hope to do more of that. I'm actually developing a feature film here in Chicago, though I might talk about in a future podcast, but it's affiliated with Cinespace Studios,
Mhm.
which is under the brilliant leadership of Alex Pisios, who's completely helped revive the film and television scene here in Chicago.
Thank
Um,
heaven.
but I, you know, as well as doing what I do here on Chicago Corner and having a voice, kind of having a little clubhouse where we can talk about things. I have not stepped out of that realm of doing creative narrative stuff. It's just looking for the money to do that stuff because I don't have
Oh,
any
yeah.
other rooms that I can sacrifice, for personal
Mhm.
settlements. Although, right now my next scheme is AMC, and I'm not a financial advisor.
Yes. Woo!
But
To
if
the
that thing,
moon.
if,
To
that,
the moon.
if that thing blows up, I don't have to worry about chasing financiers anywhere to help put the
Right.
money into producing my future projects. So
My
that's
fingers are crossed.
thanks, that is such an interesting story and how it's brought so many people together through the power of social media, organizing and coordinating and coming together, not just to hopefully walk away with some life-changing resources, but to stick it
Here's
to
a
Wall
principle.
Street, who's
Yeah. David and
going back
Goliath.
how we met, Occupy Wall
Yeah.
Street. This is the newest
Yeah.
manifestation of Occupy Wall Street, and hopefully it will also help. I think it already is establish some new rules and reforms for Wall Street, because I think our Fed is just like sick and tired of how Wall Street has continued to like tank the economy, walk away with bailouts,
Mhm.
unscathed, no one going to jail, and this might be a real a major game changer depending on how this affects the economic markets. But for
Yeah.
those
Gaming
who
the
are,
game.
yeah, but for those who are,
Mhm.
for those who love the stock, and I find no lack of irony in the fact that it's a movie theater stock. Um,
That's great.
it's exciting times we're living in right now, despite how the pandemic has really shaken things up. There's some good things coming out of this and social change and waking people up, kind of shifting into politics, minimum wage, and
Mhm.
everybody in the news complaining that nobody wants to go back to work. It's not that no one wants to go back to work. They don't want to go back
Pay
to work
them.
for shit wages and no
Pay
benefits
them a living wage. Right.
without our federal government understanding if ever there was a time to argue for Medicare for all, it's the middle of a pandemic. But
Mm-hmm.
you
They
know,
know. They
their
know
asses,
it.
we know, but their asses are bought and paid for, just like the Republic,
Exactly.
both sides.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah. So not to go too much into politics, but you living in Bridgeport, I know
Yeah.
that you've probably seen a lot in that neighborhood throughout the years. Now the dailies are kind of off the scene, but that's where the Klan. Oh, that was the wrong word to use. I was going to say. I didn't mean
Hey,
it that
did you
way.
hear about PDT?
PDT. Oh yeah, the
Daily?
nephew.
Yeah.
Yeah, he was indicted. Was he
Yeah.
indicted? Yeah. Well,
Mhm.
I reached out to you before I thought about bringing you on the show to talk about your creative endeavors, and I said, Mary, if there's anything going on in Bridgeport politically or on the streets that they want to share with us that mainstream news might not be covering, just send me a tip, and maybe it's something we can look into to talk about on the regular, civic portion of Chicago Corner. But you've seen a lot throughout the years being embedded in that neighborhood.
Yeah.
With politics.
Yeah. So here's a story from before I was even born. So my mother in 1960, she's going to vote. Now she was, big Kennedy fan. Okay. Democrat. He's Irish. He's Catholic. He's everything she loves, and of course she's going to vote for him. So she goes and, back in the day, I guess they had the booth with the curtain. And then there's a lever that you, the voting booth, the old voting booth. So she's going in there,
old school,
and there's a precinct dude who, like, he was an off-duty policeman, and he was huge, like over 6 feet tall, 275 pounds, whatever. And he follows her in there and he goes, "Let me show you how to do this." And she's all of 5 feet tall, and she's got little babies with her, and she shoves him. She shoved him. She's like, "You get out of this booth." She goes, "I know what I'm doing." So, but that was the daily way, he got Cook County for the Kennedys. And so, and then, a little bit later on in the late 60s, you hear people now, they're getting older, but they'll tell you about how when the riots were happening after Martin Luther King got shot, you hear that they remember Molotov cocktails flying through the air, or people from the neighborhood getting up on the viaducts with their guns because they know the cops aren't going to be able to defend everyone. So they were going to shoot anyone who came into the neighborhood. Now there's so many stories, Jerry, we could devote an entire podcast to what goes on in Bridgeport.
I was just about to say, some of what you shared here, I think would make a great podcast on Mars Messina Presents. Just the political landscape in Bridgeport, living there, your family having roots there, maybe just, it's not so much about talking about arguing politics one way or the other, but the political landscape in a Chicago neighborhood like that. I think
absolutely,
yeah. Podcast, especially since you grew up there and you've got those kind of stories to share from family's experiences.
Yeah. And that's how I would approach it, probably. I mean, I could talk more about, the politics and the different parties. Actually, if you want to do that, Maureen Sullivan would be a really good.
Oh, yeah. I'm friends with her on Facebook.
Yeah. So you might want to talk to Maureen. She ran for alderman here. Mm-hmm. So, stories about that, because she's a woman, and the flack that she got for running for alderman, like, how dare she? I mean, the men were calling her names, but the women were worse.
Wow.
It was bad.
What year was that, or what?
Oh gosh, when was that?
Was it recent decade or?
No, 2014 maybe.
Still not that far off. That's
surprising. That was her husband was still alive. Okay. And that's actually how I met her. I met her husband, Rob, first. But a lot of people, they'll know Maureen first, then they meet Rob, but I was the other way around. But anyway, at the time I met her, she was running for alderman, and I did some canvassing for her because I thought she had some good ideas, But whoa, oh my gosh, the threats that she got. And I'm like, Maureen, you got to watch your back. I said, the women around here are even crueler than the men are. So I just said, be careful, So anyway, yeah, you always have stories like that going on in Bridgeport. Yeah.
One of the great things that's come out of social media and Facebook, as much as I think Facebook has also got so many downsides, is at least the opportunity it's afforded me to connect with so many people across Chicago that I've read about in the news, and then you friend them and you kind of see back and forth what's going on, stories that you're sharing, and you strike up rapport with them, and you're able to make these connections to spread more of the news and information, whether it's through shows like this or people covering media on Block Club Chicago or podcasts. Social media has really become, for all of its detriments, a great equalizer for people to be able to participate and have a voice now, whether it's sharing stories, podcasting as you do on Mars Messina Presents, or people with YouTube or Rockfin and Odyssey channels as Kit and Daniel have over at the main show, Hard Lens Media. It's an interesting time we live in, being able to give everybody a voice.
Absolutely. And I am all for it. And I'm still excited. What's, kind of depressed me, though, is that people are getting on there being the so-called, what's the term that they use?
Cancel culture warriors, or the
yes
virtue signalers, and
yes.
I was talking. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Oh, I'm just saying, these virtue signalers and these, keyboard warriors, that they don't even know the person, and they just jump on you and tear apart everything you said. So there's no room for discussion anymore. You can't have a conversation when somebody stepped all over you. And even if you have a very valid point, why does anybody want to hear what you have to say if that's all you do to people? And so I've been disheartened. I've been spending less time on Facebook. Yeah. And that's a shame, because this really could bring us all together. And I think at the beginning, I didn't have any interest in it. And one of my friends said, you've got to get a Facebook account. And I had one for 3 years and never used it. And then when I finally used it, I'm like, this is great. and then something happened.
Well, in our cases too, it reconnected us with people that we hadn't spoken to or seen since high school. I mean, that was
Dwayne.
actually another fellow author, Dwayne Burghardt.
Dwayne Neil Burghardt
He ran for, I believe it was senator or state representative. Another
in Missouri. Yeah.
In Missouri. But I mean, that was the advantage of it. And then the second advantage was that it was the first iteration of people having a place to express their views, share their opinions. But then that quickly devolved into ad hominem attacks.
Yep.
Facebook taking this stance that, well, they're not a publisher, but they're censoring what certain people have to say, even if it's not a set of live eyes. It's AI algorithms that are making decisions that make absolutely no sense.
That could be a podcast right there.
Yeah, well,
because that's how they buy your mind.
Yeah.
That's how they program you. I mean, you know, this is not conspiracy theory. This is how they program your mind.
Yeah.
Is through those AI. Yeah. And AI, I mean, just that alone, the marvel that it could really create in the world, but also the total damnation that could come if we're not careful.
All these things that looked like they would be providing great benefits, like the search engine of Google or the social media platform of Facebook or Twitter, we're now starting to see the draconian side of these platforms. Once you've got these corporate monoliths controlling things and the narrative, as Kit at Hardlands Media says, this is why we need independent media, whether it's on a national level, as he is Daniel cover, or myself and my co-hosts and my guests are covering over here on Chicago Corner locally.
Yep. David and Goliath.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And always, but we always hopefully end up coming out on top with our little
slingshot.
Slingshot.
Yep.
Yeah. Do you have any thoughts on what your next upcoming podcast is? You just want to share with us what the topic is? Or are you still sorting through ideas for your next show?
Yeah, usually on a Sunday I'm bandying about different ideas, and maybe something pops into my mind on a Monday, and then Tuesday I pretty much have an idea what I'm going to do. And then when I have my free time on Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, you know, usually before bed, I'm just writing certain things down, and then on Friday night I make my outline. Saturday morning I record. So this is pre-recorded. It's not a live stream. So this is also new to me. This is my first live stream. So,
oh, really? Okay.
Yeah, I've never live streamed before. I'm a virgin. So,
well, I'm
yes, you did.
Proud to be your first, Mary.
But you won't be my last.
Oh.
So, anyway, hi-oh is what Ed McMahon would say. So I'm really excited about this new technology. You know, we were just talking about this a little while ago. We've been playing with technology for years, but it's all new again. Yeah. And that's exciting. And I like this. I like podcasting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a faster way to get the word out and bring people together. And
and you can hide in your living room.
Yeah, well, yeah, I roll out of bed. I go through my stories on Fridays. It's like, okay, what's the current news wrap up at the end of the week, or earlier in the week, I'll talk with my co-hosts and we'll figure out specific topics to cover. But yeah, well, I think that's also a result of the pandemic, though, because the hosts of the regular show, Hardlands Media, they've got a great studio over on Lawrence and Kimball that they broadcast out of, and I've had the opportunity to go on and co-host a couple shows when one or the other might have a prior commitment. And I'd like to be able to maybe get into a studio setting, but for now, this is very comfortable and it makes it much easier for me to invite people on. They don't have to go somewhere. This digital landscape and you know, webcams and platforms like what we're using here, Spotify, just make it much easier.
Absolutely. I love it.
So everybody, you can find Mars Messina Presents on Spotify. I've got the screen up there right now. And you can also find her books on Amazon under Mars Messina, Moon Over Gaeta, and Babel Speak, a trio of bedtime stories for a dying empire. I want to also quickly preview, I'll be back this Tuesday with Jose Requena, and we're going to be doing a little bit of an in-depth Fear and Loathing in the Windy City segment on the Exelon deal that's in the process of being forged with Downstate and all of the interesting politics behind that deal. And I want to toss it to Mars here. If there's anything else that you'd like to share or promote upcoming, and hopefully we'll be able to have you back on the show in the future to talk about that, or maybe even come on as a co-host if you'd like, with on the ground news from Bridgeport, or anything else of value you think is worth bringing to our viewing audience's attention.
Okay, yeah, those are all good ideas. I would say just coming up, I always drop my episode on Saturday mornings, and I will, so be on the lookout. It's usually done by 10 a.m. Central Time. And I just want to end, Jerry, by saying I'm so proud of you. I just love the things that you do. I love that you're following that unbeaten path. It's you're like blazing your own trail, and I love that you're doing this. It's I know it makes you happy.
It's fulfilling. It's very exciting, and the best part of this is being able to, I tell the rest of my co-hosts, I don't ever want to be on here by myself. I can't do that. I don't want to be some talking head. I want to be able to entertain conversation, even if it's differing opinions. We can all have respect for each other in what we're talking about. And this has come up on the show a couple times with some of my co-hosts. I can't believe, as I was telling Kira the other night, I hear some of the things coming out of my mouth now as I've evolved quickly from feeling that I was very left-leaning and liberal to being more progressive. And I don't think I'm quite to the center, but I'm disgusted with the Democrats, and I'm disgusted with the Republicans. And what we talked about earlier, the virtue signaling.
Yes.
Of our
and the canceling.
And the cancel culture on social media. Talk, nothing important going on behind the scenes, like we're seeing here in city council with these ridiculous mandates they waste their time on, while we're seeing people sleeping under bridges or in tent cities, and so much else that they're not paying attention to while they're virtue signaling. Well, we just changed the name of Boys Town so that it's more inclusive to everybody.
Oh, jeez, I know.
Honor Jean-Baptiste Point. I keep bringing that up, but it's just
I know.
That's just example of our older people who don't like their names being changed, focusing on the wrong things instead of the important stuff we talk about here otherwise. So we're going to wrap up this broadcast. I hope everybody who's visited will like and subscribe. Please share our show on YouTube with your friends on social media. There are show notes and links to Mars's books we can get on Amazon, as well as her podcast. I hope everyone's able to return this Tuesday at 7 p.m. where Jose, Rakina, and I will cover that energy story in an episode of Fear and Loathing in the Windy City. If it's happening on the streets, we'll be covering it here on Chicago Corner. I finally figured out our log on. our sign
glad to be here. I'm glad to be the first one.
You're it,
Jerry.
You're it, Mary. So yeah, everybody please join us again in the future. And Mars, Mary, thanks for joining me. We haven't talked in a long time. And
I know, and it's not by design, believe me,
it's not.
Jerry.
We just get busy.
Yeah.
We get busy, and stuff happens. But I was very excited to see what's been happening with your career and your pursuits, especially with your books, authoring and doing your podcast. So I'm like, what better opportunity to reconnect with you and to share with everybody else, because it's an opportunity for them to discover you also.
Oh,
so
thank you.
Mary.
Thank you for the opportunity. Thank you so much. And good night, everybody.
Good night, Chicago.